I had always believed that loyalty was everything. From the moment I could remember, I devoted myself to the family, keeping the house in order, smoothing over arguments, and silently putting everyone else's needs before my own. I thought that was the essence of love and responsibility. My mother, Mrs. Khan, was admired by everyone around us. She was the matriarch, the pillar of our family, the one whose word carried weight not only within our home but throughout the community. People often said she could charm anyone, control any situation, and maintain perfect composure no matter the circumstances. And for the longest time, I believed that image without question. But appearances are fragile, and loyalty, I would learn, is often one-sided. It started subtly. While helping her review the family accounts, I noticed small irregularities. A transfer here, a withdrawal there, amounts that didn't make sense in the context of our family expenses. I wasn't naive, I knew mistakes happened, but there was a pattern. A quiet unease began to grow in me. When I brought it up, I expected guidance, maybe an explanation. Instead, she dismissed me sharply. "You're imagining things," she said, her voice smooth but edged with something I couldn't place. I tried again, pointing to the numbers, highlighting the discrepancies, but her gaze hardened. There was a coldness I hadn't seen before, a calculated dismissal that made me doubt myself. Was I overreacting? Was I missing something? Then the relatives arrived. Distant cousins, people I barely knew, were suddenly treated like family favorites. Privileges that had never been mine were handed to them, better rooms, gifts, opportunities to attend family events, and conversations that once included me now excluded me entirely. Even casual mentions of inheritance or family plans were whispered to them, leaving me standing outside, invisible in my own home. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. I was no longer the one my mother trusted. I was no longer valued. The accusations came next. Without warning, without proof, my mother confronted me in front of the entire household. "She's taken money," she said, pointing at me with a steady, unwavering finger. Shock froze me in place. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I tried to defend myself, to explain, but the family's trust shifted instantly. Their eyes, once warm with familiarity, now bore suspicion. Humiliation was sharp, raw, and suffocating. I felt my world narrow to a cold, empty circle of isolation. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every interaction replayed in my mind, every conversation, every gesture. How could someone I loved and trusted so completely betray me? How could loyalty, which I had given freely, mean nothing to her? How could she destroy the very bond that had been the foundation of our lives? And yet, as painful as it was, I knew I couldn't let this slide. I had to understand. I had to see the full truth for myself. I began watching her carefully, observing every move, every expression, every interaction she had with the relatives. I noticed small things, documents she hid quickly when she thought no one was watching, phone calls she hushed when I entered the room, subtle flinches when topics of family finances came up. I became a shadow in my own home, unseen but alert, piecing together fragments that had always been there but unnoticed. One evening, while searching for a file she had carelessly left in her study, I found a hidden drawer. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were ledgers, meticulously kept, detailing transfers and investments that were not only unauthorized but illegal. Every page revealed a pattern of favoritism toward distant relatives, carefully orchestrated to benefit them at my expense. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mother, the woman I had admired and loved, had spent years manipulating our family, sidelining me at every turn. But the ledger held more than just financial records. There were letters, photographs, and notes documenting affairs, alliances, and manipulations that extended beyond what I had imagined. My mother had quietly undermined my siblings for decades, ensuring her chosen beneficiaries received power and wealth while keeping the rest of us compliant and unaware. The realization hit me in waves. I felt anger, disbelief, and a strange clarity all at once. For the first time, I didn't feel like her daughter. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone awakened to a truth that could not be ignored. I understood that my loyalty had been used as a tool against me, that trust had been weaponized, and that if I wanted justice, I would have to take it for myself. I spent days going over the ledger, memorizing details, planning, and imagining a way to reclaim what was mine, not through confrontation or pleading, but through strategy, precision, and patience. Every piece of information I uncovered became a piece of a larger puzzle. Every secret, every slip, every hidden document was a step toward reclaiming control. I knew it wouldn't be simple. My mother was clever, calculating, and used to control. But she had weaknesses, patterns, and fears, and I had the advantage of being underestimated. I began to consider how I could turn her own manipulations against her. I didn't want revenge in the form of anger or destruction. I wanted justice. I wanted the truth to surface, undeniable and unassailable, and I wanted her carefully constructed image to crumble under the weight of her actions. For the first time in my life, I felt an unshakable resolve. I wasn't just the obedient daughter anymore. I was a force quietly gathering strength, and every day that passed, every observation I made, brought me closer to a reckoning. I had been betrayed, yes, but betrayal, I realized, could be transformed into power. And I would use it wisely, ruthlessly, and without hesitation. I closed the ledger and hid it in a place only I knew. The spark inside me had grown into a quiet flame, a determination that would not be extinguished. My mother had underestimated me, and that would be her first mistake. Loyalty, I decided, could no longer blind me to betrayal. From this moment on, I would see clearly. I would act carefully. And I would reclaim what had been taken from me, not just for myself, but for the truth, and for the justice that had been denied for far too long. I spent nights going over every detail of what I had found, memorizing names, dates, transfers, conversations. Each revelation fueled me. I realized that my mother's manipulations weren't random, they were deliberate, carefully calculated to protect her chosen family members while keeping the rest of us blind. I had once admired her cunning, but now that same cunning felt like a weapon turned against me. I knew I had to be smarter, more patient, and more precise than she had ever expected. I began subtly collecting evidence beyond the ledger. Emails she tried to delete, financial statements she kept under lock and key, photographs and letters that documented affairs and hidden alliances, all became pieces of a larger puzzle. I learned her routines, the times she was careless, the moments she believed herself untouchable. Every slip, no matter how small, became a tool I could use. I wasn't just preparing for revenge, I was preparing for a surgical dismantling of the control she had over our family. I started planting seeds of doubt quietly, anonymously. Small hints, carefully worded, reached distant relatives. I let them discover discrepancies in transactions, favoritism in decisions, and subtle evidence that their own privileges were tainted by lies and deception. I never acted directly. I never revealed myself. Instead, I let paranoia grow, letting her carefully constructed image of respect and loyalty crack on its own. It was intoxicating to see her influence waver without her knowing why. Every day, I learned more about her fears. She hated exposure, but she trusted appearances. She feared the judgment of the people she controlled, the relatives she manipulated, the family she had deceived for years. I realized that to defeat her, I didn't need to fight directly. I only needed to make the truth inevitable, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. I became patient, deliberate, like a shadow moving unseen, always watching, always planning. There were nights when doubt crept in, moments when I questioned if I was crossing a line, if revenge was worth the cost. But then I reminded myself, she had crossed lines I could never forgive, had weaponized my loyalty against me, had erased my place in my own family. My resolve hardened. This was no longer about anger. This was about justice. And justice, I knew, required meticulous precision. I learned to use her own weaknesses against her. During casual family interactions, I would casually mention discrepancies in accounts, never accusing, never pointing fingers. I would highlight distant relatives' privileges in conversation, letting the seeds of doubt take root. People began to notice inconsistencies themselves, and soon murmurs started to spread. Mrs. Khan's reactions grew subtle but noticeable: slight tension, carefully hidden frustration, a flicker of fear when she thought no one was watching. The matriarch I had feared was starting to crumble, one calculated moment at a time. The ledger was my foundation, but I needed more. I captured private admissions, subtle confessions she made when she thought she was alone. I recorded conversations, collected digital evidence, and catalogued everything. I knew that when the moment came to act, I would have undeniable proof. Nothing could be dismissed as imagination or rumor. Every document, every email, every photograph was a thread I could pull, unraveling the web she had spun over decades. Then came the turning point. A distant cousin, previously favored, began to question decisions after receiving an anonymous note with a small piece of evidence. Their trust wavered. I watched as arguments sparked quietly, alliances shifted, and questions began to circulate. Mrs. Khan noticed the change but couldn't identify the cause. She tried to tighten control, to soothe suspicions, to reassure relatives. But every attempt only amplified uncertainty. Her influence, carefully maintained for years, was slipping. I knew it was time to escalate. I let the most damning evidence reach the right people anonymously, a mix of financial proof, personal correspondence, and records of manipulations that could no longer be ignored. The impact was immediate. Family members confronted her, distant relatives withdrew support, and whispered suspicions erupted into full-blown arguments. I remained hidden, careful to avoid detection, watching her panic without anyone realizing my hand had guided it. The matriarch's poise faltered, revealing cracks that had been invisible for years. I felt a quiet satisfaction, but I didn't let it distract me. There was still more work to be done. Every move I made was psychological as much as strategic. I allowed her to sense that someone knew her secrets without revealing myself. I made subtle references, asked pointed questions, and let her fear the unknown. I knew that if I exposed her too soon, she would fight back with everything she had. By letting doubt and paranoia fester, I ensured that her own mind became her enemy. The woman who had controlled the family with precision was now unraveling under the weight of her own lies. I watched her isolate herself, turning on those she once controlled, mistrusting even her closest allies. Favored relatives who had once been loyal began to question her motives, wondering if their advantages were based on deception. Siblings who had blindly followed her now hesitated, uncertain of her integrity. I became a silent orchestrator of chaos, unseen but deeply influential. Every whisper, every doubt, every revelation was a calculated step toward dismantling the power she had built over decades. There were moments when I felt the full weight of what I was doing. Revenge, even calculated, carries its own burden. I reminded myself that this was justice, that exposing her was necessary to reclaim what had been stolen, not just from me, but from everyone she had manipulated. I watched carefully, learning which threads to pull, which moments to wait for. Timing, I knew, was everything. Acting too soon would ruin the effect, acting too late would let her regain control. I was patient. I was precise. I was invisible, yet unstoppable. Finally, the moment came when whispers became undeniable confrontation. Evidence reached key family members, forcing direct questions. Her confidence shattered as documents were presented, her web of lies exposed. She faltered under scrutiny, fumbling explanations, unable to defend herself against facts she had once controlled. I remained in the shadows, letting the truth speak louder than anything I could say. The matriarch, untouchable for so long, was finally exposed, her influence crumbling piece by piece. I felt no triumph in witnessing her unravel. There was only clarity, the calm realization that what I had set in motion was working. I had turned betrayal into a weapon against the person who had wielded it against me. I had transformed loyalty into insight, observation into strategy, and secrecy into power. The family's structure was destabilized, doubts were rife, and my mother's authority was slipping faster than she could comprehend. And all the while, I remained unseen, the quiet force orchestrating the reckoning, knowing that the ultimate confrontation was still ahead, but that victory, when it came, would be inevitable. The day came when I could no longer remain purely in the shadows. Every piece of evidence I had collected, every seed of doubt I had planted, was now ready to move from whispers to undeniable truth. I had to act decisively, carefully, so that the exposure would be absolute and irreversible. My mother had underestimated me at every turn, believing I was naive, obedient, and loyal. She was about to realize how wrong she had been. I began by letting the relatives see the ledger and the supporting documents in context. I didn't confront her directly, I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Financial manipulations, favoritism, and personal correspondence revealed her decades-long schemes. The reactions were immediate: shock, disbelief, anger. Questions erupted. Accusations flew. Mrs. Khan tried to maintain composure, but her cracks were visible. I watched as she struggled to explain away facts that could no longer be denied. Her favored relatives, once blindly loyal, began turning on her. Each revelation chipped away at the authority she had relied on to control the family. I let them discover emails and letters that connected them to her manipulations. They couldn't ignore the truth, they couldn't defend her. Siblings who had followed her blindly now hesitated, confused, and betrayed. The woman who had commanded respect and fear for years was now floundering, unsure who she could trust. I confronted her privately, quietly, without anger. I didn't need to shout or demand answers. Instead, I revealed that I knew everything: her secret transfers, her affairs, her favoritism. I let her feel the weight of her own actions reflected back at her, without giving away all my evidence. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. The matriarch who had controlled every conversation, every decision, every family member was now vulnerable, aware that her control had slipped beyond recovery. As the family began to fracture, I continued to orchestrate subtle movements. Conversations I initiated, small revelations dropped in the right hands, careful nudges to relatives and siblings. I let the chaos build. By the time she tried to fight back, it was too late. I had made her own web of lies the instrument of her downfall. Every lie she had told, every favor she had manipulated, every hidden transaction now turned against her. Her world was unraveling, and I remained untouchable in the background, the architect of her ruin. Then came the final act. Evidence reached the lawyer and the key family members simultaneously. The ledger, the emails, the letters, all compiled, undeniable, and impossible to dismiss. The confrontation became public. No one could defend her now. She tried to justify, to explain, to charm her way out of suspicion, but her past was too deep, too well documented. The authority she had wielded for decades crumbled in real time. Favored relatives questioned their positions, siblings challenged her motives, and whispers of legal consequences loomed. She had underestimated the quiet, observant daughter she had tried to control. I felt no triumph in seeing her falter. This was not about satisfaction or victory in the traditional sense. It was about justice, about reclaiming what had been taken from me and ensuring that deception could no longer thrive under her control. Watching her unravel psychologically, seeing the fear and helplessness that replaced arrogance and command, I understood the power of truth and patience. My careful, calculated approach had turned years of betrayal into a weapon. In the days that followed, I continued to oversee the aftermath quietly. The family had fractured irreparably. Distant relatives lost trust in her, and even some of my siblings remained wary. But the seeds I had planted had grown into undeniable clarity. Everyone who had once been manipulated could now see the reality of her actions. I had exposed her for what she truly was, a woman who used loyalty and love as tools for control. And in that exposure, I found clarity and calm. By the end, Mrs. Khan was isolated, powerless, and publicly scrutinized. Her carefully maintained image of perfection was gone. I had orchestrated the dismantling of her influence without revealing myself directly, using patience, observation, and strategic evidence to ensure that the outcome was inevitable. The matriarch who had seemed untouchable was finally humanized in the most devastating way, confronted by the consequences of her own choices. I closed the ledger once more, not as a tool, but as a symbol of what had been. I hadn't sought revenge for anger's sake, I had sought balance, truth, and justice. My mother had underestimated me, and that miscalculation had cost her everything she had built on manipulation and deceit. I remained in the background, unseen, untouchable, and fully aware that the family I had once trusted would never be the same again. The act of revealing the truth had not only dismantled her control but also freed me. I no longer had to question loyalty, trust, or the motives of those I had once held dear. I had reclaimed my power and my place, not through confrontation alone, but through careful, calculated precision. And as I watched the family struggle to adjust, I understood that sometimes, the quietest force is the most unstoppable. The days after her exposure were surreal. Mrs. Khan had lost everything she had carefully controlled for decades: power, respect, and the unquestioned loyalty of family members. Distant relatives who had once sought her favor now distanced themselves, realizing that their privileges had been built on deception. Siblings who had blindly followed her now regarded her with suspicion, anger, and disappointment. The family I had once known was fractured beyond repair, but I felt no gloating in my chest, only a quiet sense of completion. I reflected on everything I had done and everything I had discovered. Loyalty, I realized, is not a guarantee of safety, and blind trust can be a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. I had learned the hard way that appearances can be deceiving, that people you love can betray you, and that patience and precision often matter more than confrontation. My revenge had been calculated, yes, but it had not been cruel for cruelty's sake. It had been justice, the kind that exposes truth and forces accountability. I had reclaimed my place in the family, but not in the way I had imagined when I was younger. I wasn't trying to assert dominance over anyone, nor did I seek to rebuild what had been destroyed. Instead, I focused on reclaiming my independence, on protecting myself from future manipulation, and on rebuilding my life on my own terms. The ledger, once a tool of knowledge and strategy, was now a symbol of what I had endured and what I had overcome. I kept it close, not for power, but for clarity, a reminder that vigilance and wisdom are the truest forms of strength. The fractured family dynamics remained painfully apparent. Some siblings could not forgive, some distant relatives still resented the revelations, and Mrs. Khan herself had withdrawn into isolation. But I accepted that their pain and confusion were consequences of the choices they had made, just as my own suffering had been the result of her choices. I had no need for reconciliation, the truth had set the balance straight. What mattered was that I had preserved my dignity, my autonomy, and my perspective on loyalty. There were moments of quiet reflection where I thought about what had been lost. I mourned the illusions of family harmony that had once guided me, the trust that had been betrayed, and the years spent unaware of the manipulations around me. But I did not dwell on grief. Instead, I focused on clarity. I knew that true power comes not from control over others, but from control over oneself. I had reclaimed that power, and it felt like freedom. I also realized that the impact of my actions went beyond just dismantling my mother's authority. I had forced the family to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, their loyalty, and their susceptibility to deception. No one could ignore the facts, and everyone had to reckon with them. The family would never be the same again, and that was as it should be. The cracks that had been hidden for so long were now undeniable, and perhaps, in time, they would force a kind of growth, even if painful. As for my mother, she had been reduced from the untouchable matriarch to a woman facing the consequences of her manipulations. Her isolation was complete, and she had no allies left who could shield her from the consequences. I did not delight in her downfall, I understood it as the natural result of choices made over decades. Justice had been served, and her empire of deceit had crumbled under its own weight. For me, the final act was about liberation. I no longer feared betrayal, and I no longer allowed the past to define me. I had taken the pain, the humiliation, and the anger and transformed them into clarity, strategy, and control. I had acted with patience, precision, and purpose, and the results had affirmed my understanding of truth, loyalty, and justice. The family I had loved could no longer dictate my life or my perception of right and wrong. I closed the ledger one last time. Its pages contained not only the evidence of betrayal but also the record of my journey, from a naive, trusting daughter to a woman who had faced manipulation, understood it, and countered it with intelligence and strategy. That journey had been painful, yes, but it had also been empowering. I had taken control of my life, my destiny, and my perception of loyalty. I had turned betrayal into knowledge, deception into clarity, and manipulation into a lesson that could never be erased. And so I walked away, not in triumph or anger, but in peace. The family I had known was fractured, my mother was humbled, and justice had been done. I carried with me a new understanding of loyalty, of trust, and of the power that comes from seeing clearly and acting wisely. I was free, unshackled from deceit, and fully aware that the lessons I had learned would guide me forever. I did not look back. The ledger, the evidence, the revelations, all had served their purpose. What remained was a future shaped by awareness, autonomy, and resilience. The past could not hurt me anymore. The family could no longer manipulate or deceive me. I had faced betrayal, orchestrated justice, and emerged with clarity, strength, and peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt entirely unburdened, fully alive, and free to live on my own terms. If you loved this story of betrayal, secrets, and justice, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for more gripping tales of revenge, suspense, and unexpected twists. Your next favorite story is just a click away.